Welcome to Transforming Work with Sophie Wade, exploring the future of work. Find out what's going on, disruptions, evolutions, opportunities, challenges, and interventions in our multi-generational distributed organizations. With a new tech and talent focus, discover what you need to know to stay upskilled and relevant and ensure your business keeps its competitive edge. Sophie investigates the promise and reality of the future of work now and as we look ahead. She interviews people who are changing work experiences and practices and shares how we can each transition smoothly and successfully to effective and more productive new ways of working.
Hi. This episode is about the simultaneous, multifaceted, ongoing changes happening as we advance in the future of work and adapt to modern work unevenly, in different ways in different workspaces, places and plants around the world, responding to workforce and cultural nuances, business and regulatory differences, mindset shifts and technological leaps. How do we create higher functioning office environments with more compelling experiences so more people want to go in? What makes a difference for fixed on-site or deskless workers? How do we absorb the significant structural changes affecting our organizations and workforces? To tackle these questions and more, I'm delighted to be speaking with Henrik Jarleskog, Head of Future of Work at Sodexo, the 19th largest company worldwide with well over 400,000 employees. Henrik describes his leadership mission as helping organizations embrace change with resilience and intention, empowering them to adapt and thrive in an evolving world while ensuring that work supports the lives we want to lead. Hi, Henrik. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Delighted to have you, and much to discuss. You are Swedish, based in Sweden still, although you've gone many different places. But you started by studying mechanical engineering in Sweden. Why mechanical engineering?
I chose mechanical engineering because I didn't really know what I wanted to become. Mechanical engineering area is also when you look at how to do business development, how to do quality management, how to run companies, and where you combine the economical part of things. So that's what I did.
Interesting.
They also had a design direction that you could choose on year 3 and 4 to become a designer or product designer, where you design a new kitchen machines or design mechanical things that should look really cool and attractive and ergonomic. So that was the reason I chose mechanical engineering, because I'm also very creative as a person, and I'm an artist too.
So what did you design?
I didn't really come that far because I found I found out that it was a lot of CAD drawing, and that was not the part of creativity that I excelled at. So I went more towards the managerial part of mechanical engineering and learning how to run companies.
Okay, and the creativity you were using in a business sense.
Exactly.
I do think that there's a huge amount of creativity, including strategic thinking, that is creativity applied in different ways.
Absolutely. I would like actually to stay a bit on that, because a lot of people that I know who are working with business transformation, highly strategic questions, complex challenges to tackle, they are some of the most creative people I've ever met. So I think there is a correlation between being super creative and working with these topics.
You then take the track going more into business performance management. Why were you focusing on it at that particular moment in time?
I joined directly from university as a graduate in, at the time, what's called Johnson Controls Global Workplace Solutions, where I quite quickly went into business performance because that was an area of the company that I easily could get into as a graduate.
Okay.
Quite soon, I also grew in that role, doing more or less Lean Six Sigma type of role for Europe for the company. Okay. So business performance, really understanding being data-driven, taking decisions to make companies better. So that means outsourced facilities management services. So I really got into the workplace industry already in 2004 and started to understand how do companies run their business from a office or facilities management perspective, because we were a part of that, of course.
So that does obviously have very much a people part of it. So how were people approaching workplace strategy, facilities management at that point. I know as we get to 2016, 2017, how much the people piece of it, human resources and the connection with IT, all those three pieces really need to be coming together. But this is early days. Yeah. Obviously, technology is already playing an important role in a different way. There are desktops, you're needing to sort of be thinking about desk locations and cubicles and what people need, but it's a very fixed mentality. How were you thinking about that in terms of performance and what that meant then and how that predicted where you are now, perhaps?
Yeah, exactly. 20 years ago, the workplace industry, or as it was named at that time, the facilities services industry, was much more building-centric. We were kind of focusing on how to run buildings in the best possible way. And if that was made well, indirectly, people would think it's clean and it's a pleasant place to be in, but it was not as human-centric as it is today.
Right.
So, for example, service providers provided single service cleaning or single service building maintenance or single service food services. Over the years, from that, integrated facilities management started to become a trend where you deliver a lot of services to the same company, maybe in multiple locations. And gradually, as it became more complex and the deals were done in several countries at the same time, the more complex, the more strategic, the higher up on the leadership ladder it has climbed. And we are on that journey today. And I would say compared to 2004, in 2024, it's the most strategic thing we have ever been as an industry. It's no longer a facilities management industry. It's almost not a workplace industry either. It's more a very strategic item of how to build and operate the company in the best possible way. So it's super interesting.
I've worked in Germany for 2.5 years. I've worked in multiple countries and know how very different the workplace is viewed, is set up, a workday, the attitude, the culture, all those type of things. Working at CBRE, working on global workplace solutions, you can obviously have an overview and insights from different countries, what's going on there, have some insights about tailoring and customizing for that particular country and for the regulations. Like in Germany, there are very specific regulations about the ergonomic chairs and all those different aspects. Learnings and insights about what you could be doing differently in different countries on that basis. What were some of the things that you were starting to see because of that regional and multinational remit that you had that gave you better understanding of how to improve workplaces overall?
Yeah, it's a wide answer to that question, but of course you mentioned a few of the items already. Legislation is different in almost every country when it comes to outsourcing, what you can do, what you cannot do. That's part of the game. Of course, also part of contracting. You need to learn as a company to build a global master service agreement and local country service agreements because there are different legislations. If you divide the world into three parts, like Americas, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and Asia, there are also different cultures on what you do and what you don't do in an office. There are different sets of services in Asia that does not exist in Europe and in Americas, for example. And they can be really important. And it can break a deal if you can't deliver.
Such as?
I remember working in operations for one of the Swedish telecom operators as a supplier to them. It was super important to have a tea lady in Asia.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
In the office, because that is something that at the time, I don't know if it is anymore, super important for the workplace experience, because without it, it wouldn't be as good at all.
You also become very involved at a high level with facilities management globally, looking at the different issues that people were facing. What were some of the other aspects maybe that were driving your desire to be contributing so much at a high level?
I was at the time very motivated to learn as much as possible, to have a steep learning curve. I had double degrees entering the work life, and I saw myself as a leader within just a few years. And if you enter an outsourcing company working with facilities management, every contract is like running a company, because every contract has a P&L. You learn how to grow every contract or every account. You need to manage the margin, you need to manage the people, you need to make it in a safe way, and really treat every client and every contract as a company. So it's a massive opportunity and learning place for people who wants to become managers or leaders in a few years. And I think that's one of the absolutely most underestimated things with the outsourcing industry. Because if you get into it and really understand, and maybe you get your own P&L with one contract, immediately you're the little CEO of that business. There are contracts that are $500 million per year. Everything in between. So that was one of the driving forces of actually going in there, but also because it's global. Super cool, right? To be in a position where you can travel the world or manage or work in operations for maybe the same client, different cities, different topics by week or by month. It's a great learning opportunity.
You had the ability, therefore, to be learning in an almost intimate way in each of these companies, which had very different cultures, industry sectors. And I'm defining it like this because now I see where you are and how you can look at all the different dimensions of how companies operate from this learning experience, where you were able to have a window into, but also interactions with, and being able to ask lots of questions of how these different companies were operating and why and what they needed.
Yeah.
When you go to EY, you have some very interesting experiences utilizing so many of the learnings, I assume, from this experience at CBRE. What were particular ones? There was a Nordic airline that's mentioned.
Yeah, I like that you bring this up. Some people think it's a backwards career of becoming a consultant like 6-7 years after you started working. But I thought it was a very alluring thing to do, because I really wanted to learn the management consultant skill set and the toolbox. And I could also see myself being quite credible with quite a lot of experience already coming into a management consultant role and growing that business. So over time, from entering Ernst & Young, being as a management consultant on quite a low level in that pyramid, I worked myself up, and that airline that you mentioned happened after a few years, because I also got the task of building a new advisory offering related to strategic partnerships on a specific model called vested strategic partnerships.
Right. Yes, I saw that.
Yeah. So it's a win-win partnership model where you can actually enable companies to buy outcomes instead of transactions from a supplier.
Ooh, I like that a lot.
That's super cool, right?
Both parties agree an outcome and then work towards that outcome, and how that's going to be strategically and then tactically executed?
Exactly. It's a bit more structured process than that, but I don't think we have time to talk about vested today.
No.
But it more or less is the same thing. As you said, you develop a mutual vision, and you agree between the parties on who is actually going to do what. You almost form like a virtual entity between the companies. And you are not on a transactional contract. You are on a relational contract, which is totally transparent. You sit in the same boat. You work on the same projects together. You sit on the same side of the table. So that's kind of the intent of that model. And for this Nordic airline that you mentioned, they wanted to find a new IT system operator to collaborate with, to transform the whole process, everything from ordering planes to managing staff to keeping track of where planes are, the full supply chain of an airline. And there are a bunch of these companies out there who actually can deliver these systems as a strategic partner. So this was one of the first tasks or engagements we had on this vested transformation model to figure out, okay, how can that airline find a business transformation partner that really fits, that can deliver transformative change to this full supply chain?
Throughout the supply chain. Wow, that's almost mind-blowing.
It is. And that's the type of experiences you get as a management consultant, right? You get them all the time and you learn really fast.
Right. But in terms of bringing a company in that was capable of helping the airline at so many different parts. I mean, obviously, they didn't necessarily have solutions for every single piece of it, which means finding the optimal additional technical partners that fit into the supply chain well. Obviously, it's not just the technical transformation. There's a huge piece of that is the mindset shift. It's that change management piece. You've already been learning and understanding with CBRE, change management processes, which are so critical. In order to optimize a building, there needs to be a huge amount of change management, because that's one of the many issues we're dealing with now, is successfully being able to make that transformation. Because it's not a transition. Part of it is truly transformational.
Yeah, exactly. So still, I would say to these days, when you talk about collaboration between a company and a provider, for example, the structural dynamics that are in play are still very transactional. But in that case, with the airline, we're talking about a fully transparent strategic partnership based on trust and collaboration, where you're collaborating toward outcomes instead of like trying to fight over the pie, because that was a big learning from a change management perspective, from a transformation perspective. How can you run big transformation in the best possible way? Yeah, it is by being really clear on the vision, being really inclusive with the team you have, making sure that the team really knows in which direction to head.
Right.
Make sure that the right incentives are in place so you don't get contradictory actions, and invest in a lot of communication of driving these big transformations, and making sure as well that you have a good plan for your governance. If you want to drive innovation, make sure that you have people who are responsible for driving innovation and integrating that into the business and incentivizing it in the right way. Otherwise, it will be difficult.
So part of the incentives is, with this huge transformation, to enable it to be effective, to enable people to understand what they are now being tasked with and measured by. How is that devised and refined, I assume, because things are already moving very fast. In the 20-teens, digital is moving so fast that trying to work out what the appropriate metrics are is not evident.
No, exactly. So one of the key things is that nobody likes to be micromanaged, right?
Correct. Yes.
So in this particular case, when you build highly transparent strategic partnerships that are collaborative, you make it up to the provider to manage its own operations, I would say, with key metrics. It could be service level agreements. It could be key performance indicators for customer satisfaction, for example. That company is actually responsible for making sure that they do undertake follow-up and make sure it's on the right level. Then on the more business critical areas of the outcomes that you're aiming to achieve, you set them together. So for example, if you have a sustainability target that we would like to drive down carbon dioxide footprint with 15% over the next coming 5 years, you agree on that together, and you also divvy up how you're going to contribute to that. So maybe the provider will be contributing to 75% and the buyer to 25%, because there are different strengths in play. That's fine. But that's the way to do it, right? If you're going to drive savings, who is the best one to do that? Probably is the provider again. And then you will also have to build the incentive structure around it.
Right.
So if you're about to, if you want to achieve a 20% savings over the next coming 5 years, how much is that worth for the buyer? So if the supplier really does that well, it should get a really high margin.
Right.
So that's the way to structure big transformations like this, because then you remove this power-based game of fighting over pieces of the pie that is a bit outdated, to be frank.
When you say it like that, it sounds so easy. You then move to Sodexo. You start there as a regional director and in sales and business development. You're in strategy and marketing, which is interesting. Those two aren't often necessarily combined together. So why Sodexo? Obviously an interesting role. And then how you grew with very much a strategic thread to be ending up now as head of future of work.
Yeah, it's a long story. I think it connects really well to what we were discussing about Ernst & Young and learning how to do large consulting engagements globally, traveling the world, working with some of the largest and most admirable companies there are on really strategic level. So in 2014, I project managed the vested deal between Sodexo and Johnson & Johnson from a workplace perspective, which was a pretty complex deal. I will not go into detail about that. And the next project was actually the one between Tetra Pak and Sodexo. And at the time, I got married, I got my second kid, and I was working, I think, around between 70 and 90 hours a week, traveling a lot. So I was looking for a more sustainable change in lifestyle.
Got it.
So it came in quite handy that Sodexo wanted to hire me to grow faster, to increase our margins and bring more innovations to the company in 2018. I entered in a role for Nordic business development and sales and made a transformation of the business development function quite fast.
Interesting, because you've had no sales role, I wouldn't say experience, until this point, but you looked at it from a strategic point of view. From what it sounds like,
I'd have to disagree with you on that one, because if you do 7 years with a giant like Ernst & Young in management consulting, selling highly complex strategic partnership deals, you are on sales 80% of the time.
Completely correct.
So you really learn that from a solution sales perspective, which is exactly what the facilities management industry still needs.
And I would say from an empathy point of view that what you're doing all the time is connecting with people. Sales has such a huge empathy component to it and developing partnerships. So completely agree with you. I stand corrected. Already pre-pandemic, you have a hybrid role, and then later on you go remote. Was that a specific you thing? Sweden is always ahead of everything anyway. How are you viewing how work was done based on all these different experiences that you'd had?
Yeah, we got a new CEO just pre-pandemic.
Okay.
And we agreed to do a transformation of the Nordic region. This is where, as you say, I moved in also into marketing and also strategy. So I held those three roles during this transformation, which we started before the pandemic as it happened. And regarding that note on hybrid work, I've been working hybrid since 2004. So for me, it is not much of a change, because Johnson Controls, CBRE, Ernst & Young have been super mobile roles.
Right. You're on the road most of the time, and it ends up being hybrid.
It is. And I think it's also part of being a leader. If you're part of a leadership team, you are traveling because you need to meet up with people, be there, build relationships, make sure that we know each other and know what to do. That is done still, I think, best face to face, but maybe not all the time. And then we were remodeling a bit the organization in Sodexo.
Because of this new CEO coming in.
Exactly that. And also the summer after, we got to know that we were to formalize a new continental European region that hadn't existed before because there were smaller regions.
Okay.
So that my Nordic CEO at the time was also appointed the European continental European CEO. That's where I became the head of strategy at the same time. Then the pandemic struck. So we had to build a region consisting of 16 countries, fully digital, and make that happen. That was an interesting exercise.
When you're dealing with the different policies and reactions, and which kept evolving, and trying to keep people safe and supported in high pressure, in-person frontline work, as well as supporting them from home. Having that multinational overview, and having also obviously had a lot of successful work experience, traveling a lot in a hybrid mode, what were some of the learnings that you brought out of all of that were really informing what you were experimenting with and leading to you wanting to take Head of the Future of Work, which I don't know if it existed as a job before. Maybe you created it.
I think I need to tell then a bit about what Sodexo is actually, because what we do is that we do sustainable food solutions to corporates. That's what I work. We also do it, of course, to more public institutions, to schools, and all of these things too. Okay. But we also do valued experiences, and that's the services around an office, inside an office, that makes the workplace and the workday much better.
Such as?
Yeah, it could be a barista service, for example. It could be a community captain, really making sure that everything works well. We could handle town hall meetings with the audio video equipment and the food and beverage, coffee service, pantries.
So a huge range of services, which are all very much employee experience related.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly. And then it could also add concierge services for people working in a building that need help with anything. Maybe also adding that they need help with stuff outside of working hours. So these are also things that we do from a workplace experience perspective. But also, again, of course, taking care of the more classic facilities management services like cleaning the floors, maintaining the buildings. But I think I need to tell this because people probably don't know that about this huge industry of facilities and food management in a corporate setting, because if I don't say that, it's difficult to understand what happens then if no one is in the office.
Right.
So what happens what do you think happened to an industry like this with the pandemic?
Struggles.
Yeah, it struggles. And contracts were quite fixed, many of them. So you'd have to, deal with the fact that if you're getting paid to have a restaurant in an office that no longer have anyone to feed, or if you don't need to clean the floors, that's a big problem. Right. So I remember clearly one afternoon where I sat down with my CEO, and he said, "Henrik, this pandemic is going to change our world and our industry irreversibly. We don't know how, but I want you to head up how to understand that. So let's invest in running surveys, finding out what companies are doing. Let's do white papers, and let's come out of this pandemic as thought leaders instead of being on the back foot."
And Polly, you have to very forward thinking, as well as if that is your business, you need to know where it's going. You can also help potentially nudge it in the right direction. We need to know where this is going so that we can be supporting it in the best possible ways.
Exactly. So what could be more valuable than understanding this?
Yes.
And I think exactly as you said, it's about understanding the problem statement. If you do, you can become the market maker.
Right. Yep.
So that is also what I've been doing. One of my hats as the head of strategy for the last 4 years, to figure out what the future work may be and how it looks like, maybe in different market segments, for example, or in different parts of the world or parts of Europe. Is it the same in Sweden as it is in Spain, for example?
No,
all of
it's
these
not.
questions. Exactly.
All the work that you have been doing and continue to do, trying to understand where we are, or learnings with how we've been coming out of the pandemic, because I have been astonished to some degree about how much we've got stuck on location. Yes, it's to do with autonomy and control and all those type of things. And I have been so deep in the future work pre-pandemic, that flexibility is necessary. As a business imperative, it's not about location. What were some of the key threads that you were seeing from a psychological perspective, from a leadership perspective, and with that business hat on as well, how things have been evolving and where you see some of these things going? Big questions.
Big questions. I'll try to simplify it a bit.
Please.
So we saw very early through our surveys that we did from a Sodexo perspective on the business climate, and we measured the preferences. We measured what people were expecting after the pandemic, when it's gone, when it was called back to normal. Already just a few months into the pandemic, we saw a huge shift in expectations of people seeing that we will prevail. We will keep on working from home, for example.
In Europe, which has always been more flexible, as well as the US, right?
It has been. Yeah, maybe we should actually stop on that for a few seconds, because I have something I would like to test on you on this.
Yep.
Because I have a belief that in Europe, activity-based working was a thing almost 20 years ago. It hit quite big in many offices in many countries of Europe, which means that pretty much no one had anymore their own desks. There were no corner offices for the leader or for the manager. You got into the office and you took an available desk. And you were supposed to work collaboratively in a specific part of the office. And if you wanted focus, you knew where to sit as well. That trend, as I understand it through my research over the years, didn't really happen in the US to the same degree. So my point here that I'm alluding to a bit is that when the pandemic hit, and people were locked in the US, the impact was much bigger, because they went from a cubicle to something that is, closer to activity-based seating as it had been already for a number of years in Europe. So the actual mental or psychological impact is still larger in the US.
Correct.
What do you think about this?
Very much so. Open plan offices, there has been a huge amount of pushback prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic also raised the complaints that didn't work. There were some companies, Herman Miller and Steelcase, and they have had activity-based working. And offices like SAP had some great activity-based working environments. Generally, it was just assumed you would go into work and you had these very, very long hours. Meant that experiencing a very different way of working, and that one could be effective, that I myself could be effective, I could maintain that productivity. I might not necessarily have believed that. And also bosses, 20, 30 years experience, I'm thinking of one particular CFO, it's like, I could never run my team remotely, then finds out that he absolutely can. He had over an hour and a half commute each way and has never been back in the office pretty much since, and is running his finance team very effectively remotely. So those experiences and the ability to be setting up one's life differently, which Europe has been much more open to and understanding of, has meant that mental shift has been much more dramatic here.
Yeah, it's cool that you also see the same thing, because I don't think this is general knowledge. You really have to be deep down in the understanding of how work has developed over the last 20 years to see this, that it has happened. But I think it holds a lot of truth. When we started understanding the new normal, was that younger generations, they wanted to really come back to the office. The middle part of the workforce, they really enjoyed flexible work, like parents, for example. And the older generation, they also wanted to come back to the office because they were quite used to it and really liked it.
I do find, though, that the youngest group want to come back more than, let's say, millennials or whatever.
Yes.
However, still, it's their choice. That if they're forced that they have to be there, that's a whole different reaction.
Absolutely. If it's from a choice perspective, that's very true. It also has to do with, having a longer commute, smaller space to live. Maybe you're sharing your kitchen table with your spouse because you can't sit anywhere else. These things are also important to understand this challenge.
With all this understanding and intelligence and data gathering, being in so many different countries, what do you decide strategically is best? Is it basically principles? These are our principles and you can apply them in different ways in your different countries, because whatever is possible does not mean that that's what you come up with and decide that that's the best thing for the employees. There's so many of them. And of course, different employees want different things. Different workforces in different units respond differently.
When you're asking us how we are adapting to this new reality, because all of these companies out there, they are changing. We have clients and collaborators over the full scale, everything from full-time in office companies to structured hybrid companies to fully flexible. We have needed to learn to play all of these games independent of strategic direction.
Right.
Yeah.
I loved what your CEO said, which you said inspired you, which was, nothing can be more important than understanding our market. Let's shape the future of work. So what does that mean for you in general? The fact that the future of work really is about what works for a particular company, what works for their workforce, what works for their business. How do you help support that and shape it too?
Over the last year, we formalized this role of the future work. 3 different CEOs and 1 head of marketing collaborated together with myself to build this role into a full-time role, because it went from a task to a full-time role for this summer, actually. And it builds on being accessible to our market, to our clients, to our clients' leadership teams, maybe sit on the teams as an adjuncted kind of person facilitating discussions on the next generation workplace strategy or their future work strategy.
Right.
I bring knowledge around leadership, data, IT systems, how to create a great workplace experience, how to change your space, maybe right size it, because many have problems with it. So in me, they get a senior executive who is conversant in the future work. And that is still quite seldom that they exist.
I see that you studied collaborative contracting, outsourcing, procurement. So the different elements that you can bring to the puzzle in terms of helping them think through what strategically and from a human resource, from a talent perspective makes sense, but also how to affect the change management to make it happen. What are some of the biggest challenges, perhaps even surprises, that you have been asked to deal with or offer solutions for so far?
I need to be quite granular.
Yes, please.
If we have clients that are full-time in office, there's a specific set of challenges right now because they really need to build what we call magnetic offices. The magnetic offices, they need to be a place that it is better to work from than anywhere else.
Okay.
Because either if it is not, it will be difficult to get the people in. So this is where they need help with creating a great workplace experience that is highly efficient, where you can meet up with your peers, where you probably can meet up with your friends and collaborators, consultants, in a really engaging manner, where you have the right set of tools, the right set of places to do whatever you can. So that's one of the things that is really happening with the full time in office companies, because if they do that wrong, they will get difficult to recruit, for example, forcing people to be in there without providing a great workplace experience.
Are those always knowledge workers you're talking about? Or what happens also in the situation of what I call fixed on-site workers, those jobs which are not remote capable, where flexibility and more autonomy is also very important to them?
We are a big player within manufacturing over the globe.
Sure.
So, for example, we are big in life science industry. This is where we have a mix of offices and production sites.
Sure.
So obviously, the workplace experience is being invested to independent, whether it's a manufacturing site or an office. It's just as important.
Right.
But the challenges are still there. Other questions that have come up is, what is the best way to monitor your employees to make sure that we know that they are active and working? These are very specific questions that come. And of course, you can understand where the question comes from, but I think it's more symptomatic, where advice and research points at it's not a good idea to monitor. So
agreed.
It's more like playing back and saying, okay, why do we need to do that? Don't we just need to treat people as adults because we have hired them as adults, trusting in them to do the job? Let's keep on doing that.
Henrik, you speak my language. A post that I shared on LinkedIn was about trying to give more flexibility in manufacturing facilities, giving more autonomy, which can be simply the ability to wear casual clothes. And when vacation is, how are you starting to try and address those groups of employees, because the issues are so completely different?
We see it from a service delivery perspective, or a kind of experience creation perspective. Right. We don't get into, dealing with the clothes people are wearing, but we are working more towards creating open environments where people, when they have the chance, can socialize, build relationships, and do important collaborative work. That's one way for us to change work into the better and more flexible environment. The office is probably more important today from that perspective than it was before the pandemic, because the role is turning into exactly that, a social hub where you collaborate, where you really build relationships. Sure. The research I work with says that the weak ties in an organization has become weaker and the strong ties has become stronger. What's your takeaway on that one?
Yes, that's what I've seen from the research. There's also the focus on people when they're working in a hybrid or remote situation, the need to be supporting and encouraging them to be developing local communities and relationships to support them in those environments. And then when they are in the office, to absolutely be having those collaborative situations. What haven't I asked you that I should have done?
What do you think the strongest trends right now are?
Yes, absolutely.
The two strongest, most important and persistent structural changes that we see right now that affect societies, companies, offices, and real estate are, number one, is actually that companies are doing more with fewer people. Think about the tech industry. They are laying off tens of thousands of people at the same time as they are investing more and more in AI, for example. They are also hiring at the same time, and they're reskilling and upskilling simultaneously. It's a huge job for the chief HR officer and their teams.
Enormous, yeah.
It has never happened before that you have tens of thousands of layoffs in a gold rush.
Yeah.
So that's number one. Number two is that distributed work is, it's here to stay. That didn't start with the pandemic. It started 10, 12, 15 years ago, where all of these large companies of this world put up new offices in different parts of the world and had already then people working together, sitting in the office, but just from different places. So I think that is not being hybrid, it's distributed work. Mm-hmm. And that trend is so strong that everything else about 2 or 3 days a week, being flexible or not, is just a big distraction compared to that.
Couldn't agree more. For the first point, so interesting in terms of the unit of work is moving from a job to skills and projects. And that's such a huge shift, and the change management and mindset evolution that needs to happen to get our brains around that, particularly for large organizations, that's a big one.
Yeah.
So my second and last question is, for companies, for executives, leaders of all sizes, but particularly medium and larger companies who want to move in the direction that you're talking about based on these trends, based on understanding of what the expectations are, where focus should and needs to be for the evolution of their business and for their customers and employees. What are the 3 things that they can start doing tomorrow?
Tomorrow, yeah.
Or next week.
No, I think we can come to those 3 different advice after a few seconds of resonating what is actually happening, because this is something that is evolving so quickly now. We get more and more studies, more and more data, better and better understanding of what is working and what is not working.
Right.
And I think specifically over the last quarter, a lot of things have been really becoming more and more clear. The top companies in the Fortune 500 list in the US, they are 90% structured hybrid.
Yes, that was a great post. Oh, I love that one. Yes.
And one of them is actually fully flexible, and that's NVIDIA.
Yes.
And 0 of these Fortune 500 companies in the US, they are full-time in office. If you look at the same in Europe, for the top 10, they are 100% hybrid. Mm-hmm. So from that perspective, and also from a stock performance perspective, that is super interesting, right?
Yes. Yes.
Is there a correlation between how flexible you are as an operating model and your business performance? This is becoming more and more focused on now over the last quarter. And I guess that's a segue to really making sure that you utilize the data and research that actually is at hand nowadays.
Yep.
Because I haven't still met one company who has decided to bring their people back to the office 5 days a week that transparently can show me the data that is building that decision.
Yeah.
Mostly these type of decisions, they are based on nostalgia and not data. And I have deep respect for that. Leaders of this world are, in different degrees ready for leading hybrid, for leading remote, or, in different versions of whatever it can be. So I think everyone should have that respect and not throw leaders under the bus, because this is a difficult thing. But data indicates that we are on a flexible journey if you look at the performance of the best and largest companies of this world right now. But what they also are doing is that they have a people-centric approach. Mm-hmm. They are asking, including their teams, their organizations, what is working for us, what is not working, what's your preference, how do you think we should be formalizing our next generation operating model? So that's also one of the things that they have in common. Number 2 that they have in common is that they are integrating their corporate mission into how they are choosing to work. And that's quite mind-blowing, right?
Yes.
You should probably, not do something that contradicts your corporate mission from a work model perspective.
Right. Yep.
So these two things are super important. And of course, then comes as well designing flexible, fantastic workplace experiences for when people are actually collaborating and meeting up. Making sure that they have the right systems to collaborate and to communicate. And of course, not least, to make everything as sustainable as possible. Because if you get these things right, you will get your organization with you, even in hard times. They will be more inclined to work towards working the last mile and really giving everything for the company because they've been included, they've been asked, they understand why, they see the reasoning why, the direction and the purpose they chose maybe a few years ago to join this company now even resonates even more. So companies who get all of these things right, they perform really well.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. And I respect and empathize the situation. So many leaders of large companies are extraordinarily challenged by, never mind distributed work, all the other things in terms of how AI and all the other elements are challenging our business environments and geopolitics. I completely agree with you on your perspective on that. Based on how you and I are both experimenting constantly, you're doing a great job on that, experimenting with AI, playing with it, experimenting, exploring it, is trying to work out how on earth is this going to be affecting all these different jobs. What are your thoughts about that? Tiny weeny question.
Tiny mini question, yeah. So I've been experimenting with AI now, sharpening my knives a bit for some time. And I had a feeling a year ago so that the train is about to leave the station. I am not as involved in AI as I should be. I felt that if I do not invest in this area, I will risk being left on the station and the train just leaves. So I invested in a course with Dan van Rossum, a fantastic person. And I did that privately. I think I need to say that. Mm-hmm. It was not corporate funded. And that course is about learning to lead with AI. It's an executive course, and you get to develop your own team of AI colleagues from your own ikigai perspective. So comparing to what you are today, what would you like to do tomorrow? How would you like to work? What do you like to do, not do? Focus more on, and these kind of things. And this has been an amazing experience from an individual perspective. There's a clear before and after feeling and way of working for me. I don't know if you agree on that.
Yes.
In which ways does it change for you?
It's streamlined how we do the podcast. So I have created a few agents to help streamline that process. I do love chatting with ChatGPT about some strategic elements. As a strategic thought partner, I do find it a lot of fun and engaging and interesting and giving me different perspectives about some of these issues.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? I have my own speechwriter, content producer. I have my own strategy and management consultant. I have a video producer, and I do have an executive assistant and a PowerPoint maker. I even have given them names because, they're names from heroes from the past, people who did all of these things fantastically. Now I have them every day, 24/7, and they're doing an immensely great job. So I think this understanding of how you can become, 3-4x yourself faster, more efficient, much more creative, innovate on a higher level and deeper level at the same time, having access to all of the research that you could ever dream of and get it handed to you within minutes. It's just changing everything around work and what you do, actually, how you spend your days.
Knowing that we're still very much in the very early days of all of this, and yet it's already having significant impact, including on our psyches. How are you trying to help almost 500,000 people prepare themselves or try and prepare the organization for what may be ahead? for that process of evolution that we're going through?
I think it has to start with the individual to create a hunger for becoming something else with help of tech, viewing AI as colleagues merely compared to, I'm using ChatGPT or I'm using any language model for anything, that is not the right way to do it. You would like to enthuse experimenting with finding out new ways to do and become more creative, finding out ways to solve a really challenging task. I think it has to be in that way. So what I am trying to do is to be a leading role model, be out there on the barricade, talking about how I can cut 50% of my administration time or 50% of my time spent on PowerPoints, for example. These are the things I can do as a leader and really enthuse the usage of it and see AIs as team members, AI colleagues.
Right.
I think that's the only way forward.
Agreed. And I have to say that I was inspired by some of your presentations, so I have to get my presentation AI agent on board and then give them a name.
Yeah, you should. It's much fun. You can give them vacation too once in a while when you
Oh, right. I also love that Don said, be polite because you never know in the future what's going to happen.
Exactly.
I always do say please and thank you. I love the fact that we're exploring, experimenting, and sharing all about AI together. Henrik, thank you very, very much for your time, for your insights, for sharing the very interesting journey that you've been on and all the different skills and experience that you're bringing together and research that you're doing and implementing new policies or advising people based on that data that you are gathering and creating. So I really, really appreciate your perspective and sharing it with us.
Thank you so much, Sophie, and it has been an absolute pleasure to be here.
Thanks again so much to Henrik Jarleskog, Head of Future of Work at Sodexo. You can find out more about Henrik on LinkedIn and Sodexo at sodexo.com, SODEXO.com. Immediate action tip. To move your company forward effectively, 1. You're on a people-centric, flexible journey. So ask your teams, what's working for us and not? 2. Ensure your work model aligns with the corporate mission. 3. Design flexible, fantastic workplace experiences. 4. Ensure everything is as sustainable as possible. If you are finding the new business and work environment hard to navigate, reach out to me for executive mentorship, as well as effective empathy-centered programs to enable multi-generational distributed leaders, managers, and teams to up-level rapidly for modern work and be ready for whatever lies ahead. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend and like it. You can also write a quick review wherever you listen. For regular video updates, curated useful articles, research, and information, follow me on LinkedIn and sign up for my Work in Progress newsletter there. Thanks for listening. Until next time.